Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking on a story that really defines the word unsolvable. It's this frozen knot of evidence, forensic anomalies, and just terrifying human behavior in the most unforgiving environment you can imagine. We're going back to the Soviet Ural Mountains, 1959, to a place now known everywhere as DyatlovPass.
And this is one of those cases, for you, the listener, that just resists any attempt at a neat classification. It starts with what should have been a display of incredible competence.
Right.
And it ends in just utter, inexplicable horror. For decades, the illogicality of it all has baffled scientists, investigators, you name it.
It all started to unravel when a Soviet search and rescue helicopter pilot, he's flying over this endless white expanse, and he spots this tiny flash of color.
Just an orange speck.
An orange speck. And that speck was the missing hiker's tent. But the tent was, well, it was silent, it was abandoned, and it was strangely mutilated. And that single moment, that horrifying discovery on the slopes of Koletstrakel, that's really the start of the DyatlovPass incident.
So our mission in this deep dive is very focused. We need to unpack the source materials, all the details of this sequence of events, the movements, the evidence of that panic, and these inexplicable physical traumas to see how they clash with how experienced this group actually was.
We're trying to find that breaking point.
Exactly. The point where competence just shatters and absolute terror takes over.
Because what we're really looking for, what everyone's been looking for, is the answer to that phrase from the official Soviet finding, the one that just perfectly captures the failure of the initial investigation.
The unknown compelling force.
What was the unknown compelling force that drove 9 brave, highly skilled people into a state of panicked irrationality that ended up costing them their lives?
And we really need to move past the sensationalism and look at this as an extreme behavioral response. What kind of pressure, physical, psychological, maybe military, could prompt such a catastrophic abandonment of instinct and skill?
So to do that, we have to start with who they were.
We have to really appreciate just how bizarre their final hours were.
So we're not talking about inexperienced tourists here, not at all. To really get the tragedy, you have to understand the rigor of Soviet mountaineering culture in the late 1950s.
Absolutely. The team, led by a 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov.
Just 23?
Yeah. They were from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, so, engineers, students. These were smart people.
Yeah.
And they were all expert skiers, seasoned hikers.
Right.
In the USSR back then, mountaineering was almost like a civic duty. It was tied to courage, to national pride. And this expedition, it was a really serious undertaking. They were aiming for the highest difficulty, a Category 3 certification.
And that means navigating some of the absolute toughest winter terrain the Urals can throw at you?
Exactly.
And the sources, they show this meticulous planning. They packed for a 20-day trek carrying these incredibly heavy loads.
Oh, the diaries mentioned that. The grueling weight, sometimes up to 60 pounds per person. And just how hard it was to make any progress through that deep, deep snow.
So the very act of even attempting this climb was a testament to their strength, both physical and mental.
And we have those recovered diaries and photographs from the first few days, and they are just essential. They paint this picture of, typical, cheerful student banter.
Nothing out of the ordinary?
Nothing. They joked about the weight of their packs, they complained about the cold, and they were recording observations about the landscape, even markings left by the local Mansi tribes. They were organized, taking temperatures, recording mileage. It was, a textbook expedition.
And their destination, Mount Eutorton, even that has this layer of unsettling folklore around it. In the local Mansi language, the name translates, roughly, to "don't go there."
A chilling piece of foreshadowing, for sure.
It really is.
Now, inside this, this very uniform group of young, highly trained experts, we find the first little anomaly. The first thing that later investigators really latched onto.
Semyon Zolotaryov.
Exactly. The addition of Semyon Zolotaryov.
He was the real outlier, wasn't he? He joined the group at the absolute last minute. He was much older than the others, in his late 30s.
And crucially, he had this mysterious kind of vague military background. It's often linked to intelligence or, covert operations.
So that difference just immediately creates this seam in the narrative.
It does.
Yeah.
Was he just a highly qualified guy who joined late? Or was there maybe a non-civilian purpose for him being there?
And that ambiguity, this mysterious older man with a military past embedded in a student expedition, that became the bedrock for so many of the conspiracy theories later on.
Of course. Was the group carrying secret cargo? Were they monitoring something official? It all starts with him.
And the group, it was initially 10 people, 10 strong. But they hit their first major turning point very early on. We have to talk about Yuri Yudin.
Ah, the sole survivor.
The sole survivor.
Yudin's survival was just pure agonizing chance. On the second day, he had this severe flare-up of sciatic pain, just crippling.
He knew he couldn't go on.
He couldn't. He had to make that difficult, painful decision to turn back. He said his goodbyes to his friends, and he had no idea that by accepting his own physical limits, he was sealing his fate. He was saving his own life.
You can only imagine the weight of that decision for him later. The very thing that forced him off the mountain became the only thing that saved him. It's a profound, cruel twist of fate.
And so up until February 1st, the journey for the other 9 was routine. Taxing for sure, but routine. But then, as the diaries show, the mood shifted.
Dyatlov's entry.
Yes. Dyatlov recorded that the wind was really picking up and the temperature was just plummeting, creating these punishing whiteout conditions.
Which brings us to the fatal decision, the one that, for a group this experience, it should never have been made.
Right. Instead of seeking shelter in the dense, protected woods, which were just a mile further down,
A single mile?
they decided to pitch their tent on the exposed, freezing slope of Kolatsiakal, or Dead Mountain.
And this is where we have to pause and really question their competence, which is the whole point. The tent was pitched late, which guaranteed they were setting up in conditions that were getting worse by the minute, probably in near darkness. So why? Why there?
Well, our sources give us 2 competing ideas. The first one, and it ties into their whole mission for that Category 3 certification, is this idea of pushing their limits.
Okay.
They might have just intended to test their endurance by surviving a night on an exposed slope. But even for Category 3, that's an exceptionally risky move. It's, bordering on reckless.
And the second idea?
The second is, well, more sinister, especially when you factor Zolotaryov back into the equation. Were they avoiding something?
Something in the woods below.
Exactly. Was the exposed slope, with its vicious cold and wind, actually preferable to a potential threat, human or otherwise, that they believed was waiting for them down in the tree line?
If they were just testing their limits, you'd think they'd have been methodical. Set up the stove, organize the gear. But as we're about to see, they were interrupted before they could even secure the camp.
Which suggests the placement, that decision, put them directly in the crosshairs of whatever disaster came down on them later that night.
The exposed slope made them vulnerable, but maybe it also gave them a clear line of sight.
Let's move into the time window now. Around 9:30 p.m. on February 1st. The evidence tells us they were either preparing dinner or they were actively eating it. And this is crucial for establishing that sense of normalcy right up until the crisis hits.
Everything was laid out inside the tent. Diaries were done for the day. Food was prepared. The group was bundled in blankets. But the kerosene stove hadn't been fully set up.
That's a key detail. It suggests the timeline was tight. They'd stopped, they'd hunkered down, and they were just transitioning into that deep freeze of the night when something interrupted them.
And the interruption, it wasn't a slow build. It wasn't a storm getting worse. It was abrupt, sudden, and complete.
And it immediately triggered that extreme, irreversible panic. The thing the Soviet reports just struggled to name, finally settling on the unknown compelling force.
So what could that force be? If you look at the potential triggers in the source material, they're just all over the place.
Wildly different.
Was it the sound of a small, localized slab avalanche starting to rumble, causing that instinctive fear of being buried alive? Was it a large animal, like a bear or a moose, tearing at the canvas?
Or was it something else, something man-made? Like a blinding, unearthly light tearing through the darkness of the night, which other travelers miles away reported seeing.
Whatever it was, it required an immediate, non-negotiable exit. And here's the most devastating piece of evidence of their terror. They didn't pause for strategy.
No?
They didn't unzip the tent flap. The opening, their main line of retreat was just too slow in their panicked minds.
So they drew their knives.
They drew their knives, not to fight something, but to escape. And they slashed the thick canvas from the inside with all their might.
Just imagine that for a second. Destroying the only barrier between you and certain death in a fraction of a second. It's an act of total desperation.
It signifies that whatever they perceived the threat to be, it was inside the tent, or about to be. And it was far more immediate and lethal than the minus 30-degree cold raging just outside.
And the state of their clothing, it confirms this primal flight. They leaped out into that deadly cold without their coats, without their hats, and crucially, without their boots.
Often in just socks, or completely barefoot.
A seasoned mountaineer knows that abandoning your survival gear is basically suicide, unless, again, the alternative is instant death.
And the first searchers, they found this devastating proof of that panicked evacuation. When the storm briefly subsided, the tracks were there, 8 or 9 sets of footprints.
And they were a chaotic mixture. Some prints were in socks, others were completely barefoot. One set of prints showed a hiker wearing a single boot.
But this is where we hit the first major psychological contradiction of the entire case.
Right. Because the immediate flight, the slash Kent, that suggests pure scattered panic.
Chaos.
But the footprints themselves suggested something else. They led down the slope toward the shelter of the forest, and many of the prints were found walking calmly side by side.
How do you reconcile that? A panicked flight should have people scattering, tripping, running blindly, but the sources say it was a steady, almost orderly march, despite the catastrophic lack of clothing.
It suggests that once they were out of the tent, the immediate threat either vanished or it changed its nature.
Okay.
Perhaps the initial terror was visual or auditory, that blinding light, or the sound of an impending strike. And once they were outside, they immediately regrouped, maybe under Dyatlov's leadership, and tried to maintain formation as they moved toward the only shelter available.
The tree line a mile away.
The calm tracks imply a shared, focused destination, not a chaotic route, which raises this really haunting possibility. What if they weren't just running away from something? What if they were walking away from the tent because they knew it was now compromised? But they were doing it with this strange, measured gait of people in deep shock or under some immense psychological strain.
That long, slow walk, barefoot in the snow, led them directly toward hypothermia and certain death.
So the group completes that treacherous, mile-long march down the slope. Their destination was a large Siberian cedar tree. It offered, a bit of shelter from the wind, though the temperature was still absolutely lethal. This is where you see their training briefly fight back against the shock.
A desperate, final attempt at survival. They tried to build a fire, using whatever meager materials they could find. But the sources, they paint such a tragic picture of this, their hands were already too frozen to work properly.
The fire they managed to get going was it was insufficient. It was way too small to warm 9 people in that level of cold. The struggle to just hold matches, to break and gather wood, it was already too late.
Hypothermia was setting in, impairing judgment, motor skills, everything.
But the Siberian cedar itself, it yielded the most crucial and maybe the most terrifying piece of evidence about what was on their minds after they fled.
The broken branches.
The broken branches. They were found 5 meters. That's over 16 feet of the tree. They had desperately climbed it to get a better view.
Why climb so high? If you're just looking for shelter, you stay at the base. Climbing 16 feet up a tree suggests this intense urgency, a desperate need for visual confirmation. They weren't just sheltering, they were actively scouting.
And the question immediately follows, what were they looking at? Were they scanning the darkness for the path back to the tent to get their supplies?
Or were they watching something coming down the mountain towards them? Something they might have seen during that initial blinding light event?
That height, 5 meters, it suggests they needed to see over the immediate terrain above the snow line. This activity, it strongly supports the theory that the threat, whether it was real or just perceived, hadn't entirely dissipated. And maybe it was mobile or located higher up the mountain where they'd abandoned their camp.
And it was under this tree that the tragedy deepened, the first casualties.
Yuri Krivoshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, they were the first to die, succumbing to profound hypothermia right beside that weak little fire.
And this is where we find the most visceral, terrible evidence of the choices the living had to make.
Survival instincts just overrode everything. The surviving members, desperate for any warmth, any protection against the cold, they cut the clothes off of their dead friends.
Specifically, we know Doroshenko's wool socks were taken, and Krivoshenko's felt boots were scavenged. In that kind of zero-sum environment, clothing, especially wool and felt, that's the most valuable currency there is. A necessary but just heartbreaking sacrifice.
So the group, now down to 5 survivors near the cedar, it splits again. And this marks the end of their unified march. The remaining people made 2 different fateful decisions. Some decided to seek deeper, safer shelter further down into a ravine.
And 3 others. The group leader Igor Dyatlov, Zina Komogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They made this stunning, just incomprehensible decision to attempt the impossible climb back up the exposed slope.
Back toward the terror.
Back toward the tent they had just fled.
This is the moment that, for me, just defines the entire mystery. Why go back? They were crawling against this vicious wind in deadly cold, poorly dressed. They had fled that exact spot hours earlier in sheer panic. What was their objective?
They must have been trying to get something of immense value. The radio, their only communication device, it was in the tent. Or maybe the logbooks with all their navigational data.
And this connects directly back to the military speculation around Zolotaryov. Was it something else they had left behind?
Right.
A piece of equipment, a document, maybe photographic evidence that they suddenly realized they could not let fall into the wrong hands. Dyatlov, as the leader, he would feel this profound responsibility to salvage the means of rescue, or at least the record of what happened.
Whatever the mission was, it failed. Their bodies were found scattered along that ascent line, just evidence of an agonizing struggle.
Igor Dyatlov was found facing the tent, clutching a small birch sapling, as if he was trying to pull himself upward in his final moments. The narrative, it rightly casts him as being burdened by the weight of failing to protect his group. He exhausted himself trying to go back and fix it.
And Zina Kolmogorova. She made it the closest to the tent before she collapsed. The search team noted this hollow under the snow, described so movingly as a tunnel of life. It showed she had tried to crawl until her very last breath, just pushing her body through the snow.
And Kolmogorova's body provided this critical, disturbing clue. There was a frozen stain of blood on her face, specifically around her nose.
A nosebleed.
Yeah. And our sources suggest this could be from just extreme physical exertion, pushing her cardiovascular system to the absolute limit. However, it also strongly suggests a pressure anomaly. A sudden, rapid change in atmospheric pressure can induce nosebleeds. And that becomes extremely relevant when we get to the blast theories.
So these first 5 discoveries, the 2 under the cedar and the 3 crawling back up the mountain, they show us this devastating story of hypothermia, confusion, and panic. But the discovery of the final 4, that just added layers of scientific and forensic horror to the whole thing.
The search for the remaining 4 members of the team went on for over 2 months. The harsh conditions meant they were just buried until the spring thaw in May. And this time delay is a critical factor in all the confusion that follows with the forensic evidence.
When they were finally located, they were deep inside a ravine under 4 meters of packed snow, about 75 meters further into the forest from that cedar tree.
And they had constructed what the investigators called a man-made den. It was a final, desperate attempt at shelter, digging down deep into the snowpack.
It was in this makeshift den that the bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignoles were found. And their condition. Their condition was the ultimate challenge to any conventional accident theory.
The injuries sustained by Dubinina and Zolotaryov were, well, they were horrific. They had crushed rib cages, extensive internal injuries. Forensic experts later said the impact needed to cause that kind of damage would be equivalent to being hit by a car at high speed.
And that one fact just obliterates the idea of simple hypothermia or a small animal attack.
And to expand on the forensic significance here, you really need to understand the findings from the lead pathologist, a Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny. He emphasized that the injuries were closed trauma, massive internal damage. But this is the truly chilling detail.
No external marks.
There were no bruises or cuts on their skin over the fracture sites.
Which is the medical anomaly that demands an unconventional explanation. If you get hit by a falling rock or thrown against a tree, you get massive external bruising. That's blunt force trauma. But these injuries were internal, which suggests a massive force was applied rapidly and uniformly without rupturing the skin.
It was as if a gigantic soft hand had squeezed and crushed them, as one of the sources suggests. And this phenomenon, severe internal damage with no external signs, is often linked in medical literature to hydrostatic shock.
From a blast wave.
From a high-pressure blast wave, where the force travels through the body's liquid tissues and it shatters bones without breaking the surface. This immediately points the focus squarely on external, non-natural forces.
And if the crushed ribs weren't disturbing enough, the detail about Lyudmila Dubinina, it just pushes this whole incident into the realm of the truly macabre.
She was found missing her tongue, her eyes, and parts of her lips and face.
This specific detail has fueled decades of the most extreme theories.
And we have to look at the 2 competing explanations impartially. On one hand, the body was submerged in a little stream bed that had formed under the snowpack from the spring melt. Investigators thought that natural decomposition, combined with erosion from running water and scavenging by small animals like field mice, could explain the localized removal of soft tissue.
But the immediate reaction from the families and from many of the initial investigators was just horror and disbelief.
Of course.
The targeted nature of it, the tongue, the eyes, it made it seem like proof of extreme brutality. It raises the question, did this happen while she was still alive? And the fact that Zolotaryov was also missing his eyeballs only compounds the horror. It forces you to consider external hostile agents.
And finally, we get to the scientific anomalies that definitively point away from a natural accident and towards some kind of official intervention.
At the funerals, families noted that the victim's skin, particularly the first 5 that were found, had this strange, intense orange or brown hue, which was really difficult to explain as just exposure or freezing.
But the biggest, most undeniable red flag came from the testing of their clothing.
Radiation.
Radiation was detected on the hikers' garments.
And this is where we really transition from a mystery into a potential cover-up.
Yes. The source analysis clearly indicates that the highest levels of beta and gamma radiation were found on the clothing of Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina. His belt and her pants were significantly contaminated.
And the initial Soviet investigators, when they were faced with this, they tried to dismiss it. They called it unavoidable contamination from, handling materials back at the Institute. But the measured level and the fact that it was localized to specific items on specific people, it was just too high to be casually dismissed like that.
So if this was a simple slab avalanche, where did the radiation come from? This fact strongly suggests the Dyatlov group was contaminated by residual material from a nearby source.
Like an experimental military weapon.
Yeah.
Or a failed rocket test.
Exactly. The radiation on the clothing, it transforms this wilderness tragedy into a potential geopolitical secret, which gives the authorities a massive incentive to close the file quickly and, vaguely.
So when you lay all the evidence out, the panic slashing of the tent, the calm barefoot march, that 16-foot-high observation climb, the internal crushed ribs without external bruising, the missing soft tissue, the radiation on the clothing, it's just so clear why no single, simple explanation has ever satisfied anyone.
Exactly. And we have to weigh these theories impartially against that entire stack of anomalies and note precisely where each theory fails to connect all the dots.
Let's start with the official verdict. Revisited in 2020 after 60 years of speculation, Russia reopened the file and ultimately concluded that the cause of death was a small, localized slab avalanche compounded by poor visibility and hypothermia.
And as the source so dryly notes, no one was satisfied. The avalanche theory immediately fails on several fronts, which we have to detail for you, the listener. First, the slope angle was too shallow. It was generally considered safe from large destructive slab avalanches.
Yeah.
Second, that calm march contradicts the typical behavior of people escaping a burial panic. And if you were buried by snow, why would you slash the tent from the inside, up high?
And finally, it just utterly fails to explain the radiation, the pressure injuries which an avalanche would cause externally, or the sightings of those strange lights.
So the official conclusion falls short. Let's turn to the other major natural disaster theories.
The infrasound theory.
One of the most fascinating theories, I think, because it addresses that core issue of the irrational terror. The theory proposes that the combination of the unique mountain geography and the extreme wind conditions created a rare meteorological phenomenon.
The Kármán vortex street. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, it's a specific phenomenon in fluid dynamics. When wind flows around a blunt object, like the peak of Kholat Syakhl, it can create these swirling eddies or vortices of air pressure.
And if the speed and the shape are just right, these vibrating pockets of air can generate ultra-low-frequency sound waves. Infrasound.
It's inaudible to the human ear, but it's known to affect our internal organs, the inner ear, the brain. Exposure can induce intense feelings of anxiety, nausea, suffocating panic, visual hallucinations.
The very definition of the psychological state you'd need to be in to slash your way out of a tent and flee barefoot into a blizzard.
It's incredibly compelling because it explains that collective instantaneous panic. Did their own environment literally drive them insane for a critical 30-minute window?
But the weakness of the theory, it remains immovable. Infrasound explains the psychological trigger, but it completely fails to account for the catastrophic physical evidence they found months later.
The crushed ribs?
The crushed ribs, the missing soft tissue, and most importantly, the radiation. Psychological panic doesn't give you the impact equivalent of a car crash.
So that forces us to turn to the theories that incorporate both the trauma and the geopolitical context of 1959 Soviet Russia, the secret weapon or external force theories.
The central idea here is blast pressure. This theory posits that the team was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that they were victims of a secret Soviet rocket test, or maybe a high-altitude parachute mine exploding overhead.
And this theory, more than any other, powerfully connects the disparate facts.
It really does. Could the extreme internal crushing injuries, those shattered ribs without external trauma, have been caused by the rapid, massive pressure changes of an aerial blast wave? A shock wave traveling through the body can absolutely cause the kind of hydrostatic shock that Dr. Vozrazdani observed.
And a weapons test potentially explains the radiation on the clothes, especially if an experimental explosive or some nuclear material was involved.
It also perfectly addresses the unearthly light, or the orange spheres that were reportedly seen by others in the area that same night, the visual cue of an exploding device or rocket debris.
So if the blast caused the injuries and the immediate shock, the group might have fled the tent, momentarily paralyzed and dazed, which would explain that calm march down the slope before the cold and their internal injuries finally overcame them.
The blast might have happened above them, causing panic and injury, but not actually burying them in snow.
We should probably mention, just for completeness, the theories that are rooted in folklore.
We should. The local Mansi people have always maintained that Kolatsiakal, Dead Mountain, is cursed.
And the most extreme theory, the one that really speaks to the sheer brutality of the trauma, involves an attack by a Russian Yeti, or a mink.
And while these theories lack any real physical evidence that stands up to scrutiny, the missing tongue is often cited, but it's generally attributed forensically to scavengers. The sheer violence and the unexplainable trauma, it pushed the human imagination to invent a mythological assailant, just to account for the physical damage.
But ultimately, we are left with the cold, hard facts of pressure trauma and radiation.
We started this deep dive with the premise that we were looking for a single logical explanation. But the lasting legacy of the DyatlovPass incident is the refusal of the evidence to align. We're left with this clear dichotomy.
On one hand, you have undeniable evidence of instantaneous, organized panic. The slashed tent, the abandoned clothes, those steady tracks.
And stacked against that, you have undeniable evidence of bizarre, violent physical trauma and contamination. The crushed ribs without external marks, the missing soft tissue, the unexplained radiation, the strange skin color.
The challenge remains connecting the fleeing, the injuries, and the military contamination into one single narrative.
Was it an aerial explosion that simultaneously caused the psychological shock, the flight, and the physical trauma, the crushed ribs? That seems to be the most comprehensive theory. It explains the most anomalies, but even then the official record remains sealed in the snow.
Today, a simple memorial rock stands at DyatlovPass for the 9 souls they lost. The wind still howls, the snow still covers the tracks, but their desperate choices still speak to us across all these decades.
As we conclude, let's go back to that critical moment of desperation. Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin fighting their way back up that freezing slope toward the abandoned tent.
They had just run from a terror so profound they'd destroyed their only shelter, and yet they turned back. They knew the risk was certain death given their condition.
So if the team was running from an external, man-made threat, a secret they knew about, possibly linked to Zolotarev's presence, what crucial item did Dyatlov, the responsible leader, believe was worth risking certain death for?
Was it just the radio to call for rescue? Or was it something unique? Perhaps a specific piece of equipment or a roll of film taken during that unearthly light. A physical object they knew could prove what truly happened that night. A secret they died trying to retrieve before whoever caused the incident could cover it all up. That is the final chilling question this deep dive leaves with you.
Some secrets, it seems, are indeed buried deep in the snow, never to be solved, only forever discussed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.